Hello and welcome to our latest Euronews Debate, coming to you this time live from the European Parliament in Brussels. My name is Damon Embling. I'm a journalist with Euronews, and I've got the great pleasure of hosting and moderating this section for the next 60 minutes or so. So what's the question we're asking today? Well, it's this one. How can Europe shape the future of biosimilar medicines? I've got a great panel lined up alongside me here. Let me introduce you to them. On my immediate left here, we've got Ian Henshaw, who's the Global Head of Biosimilars at Biogen. Hello to you.
Hello.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Delighted to be here.
Great to see you. On my far right here, we've got Tomislav Sokol, who's a member of the European Parliament. Thank you very much indeed for joining us as well.
Thank you for inviting me.
And on my immediate right here, we've got Adrian van den Hoven, who's the Director General of Medicines for Europe. Welcome to you as well.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
So, biosimilar medicines, they've been around for some years now, but their take-up across Europe has been patchy, to say the least. So, why is that happening, and what can be done to provide better and equal access for people and patients? The aim being not only to improve treatment options, but also to save health services money across Europe as well. Something that's been in sharp focus in the wake of the pandemic, which, as we all know, had such a huge impact on resources. So that's the context about what we're talking about today. And if you have any questions in our audience, wherever you are today, please do send them in to us. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll put them to our panel a bit later on. All you have to do is leave the questions in the chat box just below the video screen where you're watching. And as I say, we'd love to hear from you, so please do get in touch. Ian from Biogen, I'd like to come to you first. Many people watching this might be thinking, what on earth is a biosimilar medicine, and what does it do? Why should we be bothered about this? So just break it down for us in simple terms.
Damon, thank you. Biosimilar, it's in the word. Bio is a reference to biologics, and a biologic is basically a large molecule. It's about 800 times bigger than a small molecule that you may associate with aspirin. We know biologics as products such as insulins, as oncology treatments, rheumatoid arthritis, etc. They come from living cells. They're made in bioreactors. And from that perspective, you get 1 batch, 2 batch, 3 batch, 4 batch through the life. A biosimilar is a similar version of that reference product. And it continues that journey of referencing off a batch of a batch, referencing it. And through the comparable methodology and technology they have, they work within tightly regulated parameters. So you end up with a similar product.
We're going to delve in later on into kind of how they can be used, biosimilars, in terms of treatments and what conditions and what people can benefit from. But just give us an overview of how they can be used in the health systems.
So they are used both first line and second line across Europe. And they are predominantly used for rheumatoid arthritis, non-small cell lung cancer, insulin treatment of diabetes. They are generally chronic disease or cycle diseases that you see coming through. And their impact on medicine and for patients has been monumental since their inception 30, 40 years ago. And it will continue as a treatment choice for the foreseeable future until we get cures.
Okay.
So they're a huge impact.
Okay, thanks for now. I'd also like to bring in another guest that we have joining us from Italy today. Let's say hello to Luisa Avedano, who's the CEO of the European Federation of Crohn's and Ulcerative Colitis Associations. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon, Luisa.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, you represent associations that represent patients and people, so those on the other end of receiving biosimilar medicines. What do you think about biosimilar medicines overall and how useful they are?
Well, first of all, my knowledge is mainly focused on IBD, that is the disease area that my association is representing. We have been following the evolution of biosimilars very carefully. We have been involving our community since the very beginning of the debate. We also ran a couple of surveys to better understand which was the perception on biosimilars within the patient community. And I have to say that generally speaking, apart from an early difficulty in understanding the difference, or even if you want better realizing which were the commonalities between originators and biosimilars, We are now dealing with a community that is fully aware of the importance of biosimilars, but on the other hand, we are not experiencing yet the big changes that were supposed to be. Just to give you an example, in our disease area, the percentage of patients that have accessibility to biosimilars, to biologics in general, is between 20 and 25%. With the introductions of biosimilars, nothing has been really changed. That means that there is still a lot of things to do to better include biosimilars in the protocols, and also to make a level of awareness higher, not only in the patient community, but I would also say in the healthcare professional community.
Okay, Louisa, thanks for that. Adrian van den Hoven from Medicines for Europe. Louisa touches on a very important point about how patchy the use is of biosimilar medicines in Europe right now. They've been around for a number of years. You represent developers and manufacturers of biosimilar medicines. So what kind of market are they operating in right now, and why are there such limitations that, like Louisa's talking about?
Yeah, well, I think we've had biosimilars since 2015, so they've been around for a long time. We have 1 million patient years of experience, very positive experience, because the European Medicines Agency, they track these medicines with a digital pharmacovigilance system specifically. So we know this data is very clear and coherent and very, very positive. They made a huge difference across Europe because these biosimilars have increased access by 50% over the period when there were no biosimilars. So this is really, 50% more patients treated, which is huge. Unfortunately, though, that doesn't mean that all of the patients who should be treated are receiving that treatment. And Louisa made a very, very clear point. There have to be policies to enable greater use of biosimilar medicines. These are very low-cost medicines, so much less expensive than the original version, so the healthcare systems can afford it, but there are different barriers out there. Louisa was talking about inflammatory bowel disease, but we know for rheumatoid arthritis, also in Italy, there are about 25,000 patients who could be treated and who are not treated, so it's kind of a similar situation.
And that's a huge number.
That is absolutely huge, because that's a very crippling disease, just as inflammatory bowel disease can be very crippling in terms of the life of the patient. Also, we saw in the UK, they did change the rules recently in the UK. 25,000 more rheumatoid patients can now be treated in the UK thanks to biosimilars. But we also have some very difficult situations. So in some Central and Eastern European countries, they are using biosimilars, which is positive, but there are restrictions to the prescribing. So very few patients are being treated. The difference between the highest country in Europe of use of biologics, which is Denmark, and Poland, which is the lowest, is 25 times lower access in Poland. So you see, we've got some work to do. And these are affordable, so we need to work with the governments to get these medicines to patients, to get Louisa's patient community treated, but also in other countries as well.
Because isn't it the case that it's not just about getting the governments and the health authorities on board, it's also about what you were saying there about the prescription of them, because doctors have to prescribe them and use them. It's not something you hand out in the pharmacy, right?
Well, for most of these products, they're either dispensed in a hospital, often by a nurse, let's say, or if they are accessible in a pharmacy, then indeed they have to be prescribed by brand name. It's to do this pharmacovigilance tracking that the European Medicines Agency does. So this is how it works. So we don't have substitution like you would for, say, a generic box of pills. So these have to be prescribed, and you have to get the engagement then of physicians, as Louisa was pointing out. First of all, to understand how to use them, and secondly, to understand to use them more. One thing that's really worked well is where patient communities, like associations like Louisa's, medical societies, nursing societies have come together, and a small piece of the savings from biosimilars has been given back to help provide additional services for the patients. This has typically led to an increase in the prescribing and an increase in the access. And this is something that we strongly advise and support.
MEP Thomas Sokol, I mean, we had some quite stunning statistics there in relation to the use of biosimilars across Europe. The EU is supposed to be about harmonization, right? And everybody's singing off the same hymn sheet. Why is it then, if they're cheaper and they're more effective and they can help many people with different conditions, why are they not being used in a uniform way, do you think, from an EU perspective?
Yeah, so the first thing is the division of competences on healthcare between the member states and the European Union. So unfortunately, we on the EU cannot harmonize or unify what member states fund in terms of healthcare, so which medicines, etc.
But you can encourage them.
Yeah, but so the current situation is that financing, organization and management of healthcare system rests with the member states. What we can do is support national policies, provide recommendations, guidelines, etc., but we cannot legally harmonize things like that. So when we speak of medicines concretely, we have two-level systems. So first, the approval to put medicines in the market in the first place, meaning that you have proved that they are safe and efficient. This is done by EMA, by the European Medicines Agency. But once EMA makes its decision, when you put the medicine on the market, whether it will be funded by national health insurance is decided by each individual member state according to its own rules.
So it's a bit of it's a lottery.
Yeah, because since our system is predominantly public, right? So these are public health insurance funds.
So shouldn't the EU take more control of this?
Yeah. So there are possibilities to influence this, but you cannot legally unify this completely. So what we can do, for instance, so we can make procedures on the European level, the EMA procedures simpler, faster. We can remove some of the unnecessary parts of the whole approval process, but we can get to that a bit afterwards, because currently our European procedures for the approval of medicines put in the market take much longer than, for instance, in the US. Yeah. And if you have this kind of a situation where you have a global competition, then we are lagging behind, and we are not providing enough incentives for industry to actually offer their products here in Europe. So that's a problem. On national level, so what we can do is we can provide incentives as well. There is a directive, the so-called Transparency Directive, which is more than 30 years old, never been amended, which is a rarity in the European context, which actually sets some principles on national reimbursement decisions. So it essentially says that member states cannot discriminate, so they cannot charge higher price for instance, domestic medicines when compared to domestic medicines from other member states, and the whole system should be transparent. So, but this directive is very, let's say, ancient. It's very old. It's not really up to date. And one of the initiatives that I've been advocating for is that we have to amend this directive. But unfortunately, and to define certain basic principles which national authorities should respect when making reimbursement decisions. Not to decide on European level what they should reimburse, but to set some principles that they would have to respect. Unfortunately, there is a big opposition from member states, and you know that in European Union European Parliament cannot do anything alone, so we have to have the proposal by the Commission, and then we have to get the final approval from the Council, meaning the Member States. And whenever there was a kind of an initiative to amend this Transparency Directive, to make this system of national reimbursement decisions more transparent, some Member States were always against it and always blocked this kind of a change. This is a problem. Some Member States don't want to have more common European approach to this.
Okay. Ian, from Biogen, it sounds hugely complicated, this system that you're working in. I mean, are there also other factors at play in terms of sort of patents on other more traditional medicines and competition? I mean, how much of a challenging environment is it? Because if these medicines, and I repeat the point, are cheaper and they offer a lot more treatment options, why aren't governments taking them up? Why are we not seeing it right across Europe?
Well, firstly, let me commend what's happened in Europe.
Yeah.
You know, the industry is 17 years old.
Yeah.
And I think through that process we've learned a lot, whether it's 100 million patient years or whether it's 83 approvals, we've learned a lot. But I think the other most brilliant bit is that Europe is 27, 28 different countries employing or deploying a biosimilar strategy. So we've actually had, for the last 17 years, a test bed of what's happened. And this is actually, yes, you got a split of results, but you've also got great case studies of where it's really working. So $18 billion is being saved since the inception, and we have talked about the number of patients increased there are challenges, and when do you start? That's always been a challenge. But I think the biggest challenge is trying to anticipate the uptake curve in each of the different countries, the tendering and contracting process, and also the patient services and pickup. So there are variations, and it's been, I'm going to say, delightful learning about it over the last 5-6 years since we've been in there. And there's more to come, as you've heard, in terms of improving that standard across Europe. And I think that's our challenge.
Okay.
The second point is, and it was mentioned earlier, savings are top of the agenda.
Yeah.
But access to that medicine and also innovative medicines is just as important. And as we pointed out earlier, the quality of care can improve and start to generate and make this all work. So you actually need all three to work in order for it to be really effective. That now is the challenge for us all.
Okay, Ian, thank you. Luisa, I'd like to go back to you in Italy, Luisa Avedano. What do you think are some of the factors at play here in terms of the take-up of biosimilar medicines from your experience?
Well, I think that there is something missing in what I heard from my colleagues. It's the role that patient and patient associations can play when it comes to joining forces, raising awareness, and also showing by evidence-based information and evidence-based data where are the differences. I think that it's important at this point to take into account also the general framework, the European framework that is saying that patients should play a more proactive role in any decision that have to deal with their own health and care. And if we start from that, and we are all joining forces, policymakers, industries, medical societies, and also the associations, not only patient association, but also the European or international platform of industry, I think it would be easier to not only raise awareness, but also to create a kind of critical mass that, based on the evidence, based on the successful examples, can show that it's possible to make changes. I also would like to add another point that for the patient point of view is very, very important, is something that is always forgotten. What is missing also in the debate is something that was stressed at the beginning, but now, as I was mentioning, is a bit missing, is the safety, and also the necessity of having a fully transparent tracking process that really creates some troubles in the patient community. It was something that was discussed at the early stage, so when biosimilars were introduced, but now it's something that is not that much taken into consideration into the discussion. I know that if a drug is approved by EMA and the national medical agencies, it's of course safe, but I think it, again, in terms of raising awareness and educating the audience, the general audience, but also the patient and the medical audience, it's important to stress the point that we are talking about something that is fully transparent, safe, and can give the opportunity to much more patients to be treated with innovative drugs. And I think it's important because when it comes to incentives of compensation, I agree that it's important to stress the fact that we should balance, and part of the savings should be given to the patient community or the hospital that is taking into account this part, but it's also important to stress the safety side and also the tracking of these new, that are no longer new treatments in Europe and also beyond.
And Luisa, just briefly on this point about safety and the sort of image of biosimilars, I think you did a study quite a few years ago now. I think it was back in 2014, 2015. Only a quarter of people surveyed said they didn't have any concerns about biosimilars.
Yeah, this is true. And it was something that was really interesting from our side. But then after 2 years, we ran the same survey that was called BAB, Biologics and Biosimilars, and we noticed that there was not a big difference between the first round of the survey and the second round of the survey. And I think this is the problem. There was a big attention, and it was normal, obvious, at the beginning of the discussion and the debate around biologics and biosimilars. And then I think that all the communities, including the patient one, have probably given for granted some elements that need to be stressed because it's important. Because if you just focus on price and you simply say, oh, they are cheaper, so you can treat more people, you can treat more patients, and then we know that is not the reality, because unfortunately, although figures are improving, it's not that true that there is an easy access to biosimilars in every European countries. I would also add there are differences between regions and regions within the same European country. I'm talking about the European Union at the moment. So I think that we should take into consideration the entire envelope and, how can I say, consider that savings are important, but it's also important to give the full picture of the potential value that biosimilars can give to the patient community, but in general to the medical community. And I think it's important to educate not only patients, but also, I would say, policymakers, and I would say also at least the general practitioners on that.
Okay, Louisa, thank you. Adrian, a couple of big issues there, safety and pricing. The word cheaper was used. First of all, on the point about safety, how safe are biosimilar medicines? But also, if they start to have this image that they're cheap, maybe patients are going to start saying, well, I don't want it, it's cheap. It's not safe.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the safety point, Louise is absolutely right. So there is a wealth of data that is available from the European Medicines Agency, and which is published one time per year, which tracks all of these medicines and the original reference product and makes a comparison. And the data is all positive in the sense that there are no unexpected adverse events associated with biosimilars. So that's really positive. Probably the downside is that information is published once a year, probably to a lot of expert people. I would probably include Louise among those expert people, but not disseminated widely enough. So there's some room for improvement there in terms of communication and involvement. I would say one positive aspect is that the European Commission has really made an effort to involve medical societies, patient associations, which are kind of structured in European groups, the European Parliament, all the stakeholders to build a consensus around biosimilars. And this has had a very, very positive impact to get this information out. But there's always room for improvement, of course, in this space. So that's great. On the savings point, so it's true that biosimilars have had a massive impact. So at a minimum, they have saved healthcare systems 18 billion euros. Okay, this is at a minimum because we cannot include in that the calculation of confidential discount. So it's much higher than that. So that is fantastic for healthcare systems that are struggling financially, as everybody knows. However, we're not in the business of saving money. We're in the business of saving lives and improving lives. This is where we want to go. So I think there is this point that Louisa was making, that a small share of the savings saved for inflammatory bowel disease or rheumatoid arthritis or oncology could be reinvested, because often these conditions require not just the medicine but other services. Maybe you need more nurses, maybe you need additional services. Those are often paid out of pocket by the patients, despite the fact that we have public health care in Europe. And so, you know, some small reinvestment, while still keeping a lot of the savings for healthcare, really can make a big difference, because I think what we want to see is more patients treated, better treatment, because we do see in countries where this happens, in countries like Denmark, for example, they have taken biosimilars to the next level in the sense that they are treating 50% more patients than the European average, okay, with biologics. What this probably means, we don't know for sure, is they're actually treating patients earlier in the progression, in the development of their disease, to stop it from progressing, which means to stop it from getting worse. And so this is really hugely important to give doctors that freedom to do that, to educate doctors that that possibility is there. And I think in a consensus-driven country like Denmark, you can do that fairly quickly. In a lot of countries in Europe, we don't have as much consensus operating, so maybe patient associations are not involved in the decision making, maybe medical societies are not involved, it's just the health insurer who says we need to save money, you're going to do this. And that's typically not the most successful policy when it comes to biosimilars. You actually need to involve the stakeholders in the discussion, let them have their say, let them voice their views, and then you can build something that saves money but also that saves lives, and that's where we want to go.
Thomas Sokol, how much of this is about transparency that Louisa was saying, but also about this educational aspect?
Yeah, I think that's very important. I think raising awareness not just among patients, but also among the physicians that were mentioned, but also among policymakers is crucial. And for that we need data. We need more data. We need more real-world evidence. I'm glad that now we have the proposal of the regulation of European health data space, for which I'm the rapporteur in the Parliament, which will make this data from across Europe much accessible in a much easier manner than it was before. And I think that this can be a real breakthrough, especially in some healthcare systems, because healthcare systems are in many cases in many member states very closed, and especially when compared to when taking into account the European dimension, this is not something which is considered. Healthcare is not considered very European-like, and ministries of health are not usually those ministries which follow very closely what's going on European level. That's more, for instance, unlike ministries of finance, ministries of economy, etc. These typically traditional European competences, yes, so they are engaged. But ministries of healthcare are in many cases very close to what's going on European level. This has started to change, and I think, unfortunately, because of COVID-19, healthcare has really become one of the main European issues, and it wasn't before. So traditionally, healthcare was always a marginal topic here in the Brussels bubble, let's be honest. But this has changed after the COVID-19 pandemic. Now we are really discussing this. We are discussing many issues here in the Parliament, in the Commission, among stakeholders, many healthcare issues. And now we have this really big opportunity to make big changes in terms of European health policy. Actually, to create European health policy, because I think we didn't have European health policy before. But what is important is to keep that momentum going. And this is why these kind of discussions are important, because now we have new topics emerging or have already emerged. Now COVID-19 is not the focus anymore. Now it's Ukraine, energy prices, etc. So we are kind of already losing this momentum, and this is why we have to continue to work intentionally to maintain these topics as high as possible in the European public debate. And also one thing that I also wanted to mention about the allocation of resources. That's from the politicians' point of view and policymakers' point of view very important, because whenever you decide to fund medicine A, you are also deciding not to channel this funding into medicine B.
Right.
And then you have a problem if this medicine A is something very expensive, it only prolongs life, I don't know, for 3 or 4 months, etc. These funds could be used elsewhere, but then we have a lot. But then the problem is about public perception, big public pressure to provide funding for this sort of medicine. So a lot of these kind of discussions are politicized, are very populist in many cases, and are not based on evidence and on rationale.
Right.
So in many, especially in I would say poorer member states, if you want, it's not politically correct to say it, but that is the case like in my country. In Croatia, these kind of allocation decisions are very hard. So to decide whether to invest in A and disinvest from B. So it's very hard to make these kinds of decisions, and it's very hard to find a balance there. And this is something that needs to be also mentioned.
Ian from Biogen, a politicized environment. I mean, politics are at play here, right, in terms of health systems in all the different countries in Europe. How does that make it even more complicated if you're trying to get more biosimilars into the market? What are some of the challenges and solutions around that?
Well, the challenges continue with, first of all, choosing the right product or starting there. But I think once you've done that, it comes to manufacturing. And to pick up on a point that Adrian was making, it costs us the same to make it. What we're offering through free and fair competition is an opportunity to offer it at a differential price. And that's a lower price maybe compared with the innovator. That creates competition. And then as you add more biosimilars in, you get a more competitive environment. I think from that perspective, creating that open environment, looking at policy around targets as opposed to incentives or stick mentality in terms of this must be done, which Thomas has covered perfectly before, is the right space to create. And I think that will flourish. I think that will actually help there. On the headroom for innovation or headroom for more patients, I think biosimilars just bring this opportunity.
Sure.
The question then is how do healthcare systems, hospitals, etc. And I think on the patient point, we need to understand we're all patients, first of all. I'm motivated if I'm offered a product that I know will then allow another 2 people to get treated. And I think we just need to step into that mentality as we look forward. And I think that's the collective or collegiate way forward. So there's a lot on education, patients' choice still is there, and making sure that arguably we never run out of product, which is a supply security point.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a piece there that is dear to us ensure making that we never run out of product.
Okay, Ian, you had something to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add, it is sometimes very politicized, and it's difficult in countries that have lower healthcare budgets,
right.
So poor countries in the European Union. I do think, though, if you look at the numbers, and especially if you compare Central and Eastern European countries to the rest of Europe, you see that the health outcome numbers are not really super positive. This is for cancer survival. This is for a lot of chronic diseases. And there are 2 factors. One is prevention policies, which are which should really be targeting children a lot of the time, and sometimes they're very difficult. I think no country in Europe really succeeds there. But then the other factor is access to the treatment. And I think if you look, the OECD and the European Commission, they do a study of each member state and how successful they are precisely on these outcomes, right? And here with biosimilars, for many of these cancers or these really severe diseases like inflammatory bowel disease or this kind of thing, we can really transform those numbers positively in a way that's affordable for all of the member states, whether they're in Western Europe, Central and Eastern Europe. I think really we can make a difference there. And I think if you look at those numbers, you can depoliticize this debate. And I would like to see the European Commission playing a bigger role, not in dictating to the member states, but in providing those numbers and saying, look, here are the numbers. You can choose the political route, which in the end doesn't help public health, or you can look at these health outcome numbers where if you would use biosimilars more and give the patients a voice and enable this further, you would dramatically improve, say, cancer survival. And I think that could be something where the European Union would not be dictating healthcare. I understand what you're saying, but really helping. And those numbers are there. They just have to be, you have to go from these are the bad numbers to this is how we get them to improve.
Yeah, and Thomas, just briefly on that point.
I mean, that's facts-based decision-making. Unfortunately, not all policymakers are always rational. But I mean, if you actually look at these differences in health outcomes, you can see that they more or less, but generally reflect also the financial capabilities of healthcare systems. So the less money you have, the worse your health outcomes are. And it's not in every case, it's not for every health outcome, but in general, if you look at some main indicators, you can see that there is a correlation there. So definitely, since these biosimilars are medicines which are cost-effective, cheaper, let's say, we can call it like that, this is definitely a big opportunity for those member states who have weaker financial possibilities, who cannot afford the most expensive ones. But then also it's important to target the policymakers, target the mentality of physicians who prescribe those medicines, but also for patients, because as was said before, in many cases they are just, it's hard to explain to them that something that is 30 or 40% cheaper is equally effective and equally safe as the more expensive.
It's an image issue, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Tomislav, thank you. If you're just joining us for this Euronews live debate, welcome. Today we're asking the question, how can Europe shape the future of biosimilar medicines? And if you have any questions for any of our panellists that you can see on the screen, do leave them in the chat box just below the video screen where you're watching, and we'll save some time at the end of this session today to get your questions to our panellists. They're waiting to hear from you, so please do get in touch. Luisa Avedano joining us from Italy today. Luisa, hi again. We talked a lot here about politics and policy, and for a lot of people watching this, that might be a bit of a turn-off. They think it's bureaucratic and quite difficult. I think we shouldn't lose sight, right, of the people, the patients that are at the heart of all of this. We're talking about medicines that can help us people, whatever health conditions we might have now or in the future. Just break that down a bit more for us in terms of, the associations and the patients that you represent. How transforming can these biosimilar medicines be, and what potential do you think they hold going forward in terms of changing, people's the way they're having to live with conditions, and also, I guess, saving lives?
I think there is a good combination we should take into consideration, even when we think about how to influence, if possible, policymakers or politics. And it's the combination between quality of care and quality of life. In particular, when it comes to chronic diseases like IBD, serious chronic diseases, or many others like diabetes, I think that the winning point from which we can start is how these innovative medicines can really change the quality of life of people. And these lead, and I'm talking about people, not about patients, because as Jan was saying, we are all patients in a moment and another in our life. And I think that if we move the focus from the idea of a patient that is in a way a passive person that is trying to recover, let's say, and we think about a person with a disease, chronic or not, I think it's already a good change in approaching the issue. So if we combine an excellent or a good quality of care that can lead to an excellent or the better quality of life, we can really balance and probably give a different inspiration to policy, to decision makers, I believe. There is also another point that is strictly connecting to that, is the issue of indirect cost. Adrian was talking about numbers, about figures. I think that there again, there are a lot of elements that could help in making the right decision at European but also at national level. And I'm thinking in particular to those countries that have a lower investment on health. If you put together the indirect cost of living with a chronic disease, and we ran a survey that I think not by chance was led by our Polish member and the Polish university, and you count and you put together all the costs that a single patient, but also the community, not only the carers or the family have to take care, but in general, a community, the days off because you are sick, the hospital cost because you need to run to the hospital several times, etc., etc. So if you put all these aspects together, and there are plenty of figures, it's true that sometimes, and Adrian was telling it very clearly, sometimes it's not easy to detect the right figures in the European bubble, not only in EMA. But I think there are plenty of information that can be used. And I think that what we are already doing as an umbrella organization representing 46 national patient associations is trying to put together this information, at least when it comes to patient associations, and try to compare them, not to decide who is the best, who is the worst, but simply to show that there are inspiring practice that can be applied and adapted in every country.
But Luisa, right now, I mean, as we've heard, it depends where you live in Europe and what kind of access you have to biosimilar medicines. And I mean, how much choice do patients actually have? I mean, if the doctor doesn't tell them about it, they may not know anything about it. I mean, what do you think of that kind of situation that we have right now?
Well, what we can try, and we do from our perspective, is to offer as many instruments as possible to our patients in every country, so they can at least be informed. We know, and it's not just about clinical trials, but in general, that sometimes it's very difficult to get the prescription simply because your treating physician or your GP is not aware of the possibility. But I think that the good point there is really to inform and train, educate patients as much as we can. So in this way, a patient can go directly and ask for what is needed or for what he or she thinks is important for treating her or him. It works. Believe me, it works. We are now opening. It's not Europe, but we are now opening in non-European countries this way of approaching to patients, training, giving information, offering different set of training modules. In that way, everyone can have a certain control of the disease, not only, but also a certain control of what is moving around in terms of new treatment. Very often we see that it's just the case of knocking at the right door. I don't want to simplify the issue, but I think that very often is because patient and patient association mainly, because I see also a big difficulty for a single patient to start negotiating for his own possible new drug. But patient associations very often can really give the voice to patients, and the way is being informed, knowing that in other countries things are going differently. Adrian was mentioning the good practice, the inspiring practice in Denmark, but there are also other practices. But I would add another aspect. Patients should be involved in any kind of decision.
Sure.
So in that way, they can really push in a direction instead of another one and help in the decision-making process.
Okay, Louisa, thank you. Ian from Biogen, education, this word keeps coming back up, and also this is about transparency as well, I guess. But you are going to have different groups of patients, right? You're going to have patients that question every move of their doctor. What are you doing? Why are you deciding on this? Why are you giving me that? Others that might have a mild interest, and then others that don't have any interest at all. They leave it in the hands of the people that they trust.
Yep.
So in terms of that kind of relationship, how important is this educational aspect, and also giving the patient a greater voice in actually the treatment that's ultimately going into their body? I mean,
it's something that we've been challenged with, tackling since the inception. I think the quality of the product has come up, made here or in Europe to a certain standard. That's very apparent, and a good reference point. The information through the regulatory process and beyond, with the physician, with the pharmacist, who may or may not be involved directly. And then as you look to the nurse, the nursing community with self-administered product, subcutaneous product, and the training of that, and the use of maybe a training pen works well.
Yeah. Does there have to be a mindset change as well?
I think even when you change a pen from this to that,
yes.
you
have a nicer one than me, by the way.
Thank you very much. But you get a different shape and maybe a different feel, and it may have a click or it doesn't have a click. These things are, good to go through, and it stops that sort of hesitancy. And then I think what is available through the patient groups is, again, very rewarding in terms of reassurance, making sure that they're there. And then finally, there is always the opportunity of the patient helplines, care lines, etc., that exist. And more recently, the apps. You see these apps coming through which talk about, if you're in a chronic care, it's there with you for life. You're monitoring certain things.
Sure.
And those, that digitalization, also part of, the policy in Europe, helps to make sure that you get that concordance and adherence with the patient. So there's a lot to go, and we're going to continue on that avenue.
Adrian from Medicines for Europe, tech is a very important thing in many aspects of our life, and it has actually given patients a lot more control and a lot more knowledge around the treatments that they might be having for a certain disease or a certain condition. How important do you see that going forward, then, the role of technology?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we have seen for sure is medical societies, the patient societies, all of these groups, the nursing societies, they've all structured themselves to be engaged, collective actors around things like biosimilars. And, when biosimilars first came out, they were targeting oncology and children's growth diseases, so children. So you had a lot of interaction, a lot of challenging interaction with these well-organized groups. So that's That's really great. What's also made this possible is that these networks can cooperate with each other. Luisa's in Italy, but she has colleagues all over the place in Europe. They can cooperate with each other much more easily now thanks to the internet. And so this is something that enables everybody to cooperate much more, information to be available. By the way, information on biosimilars is available in every single language published by the European Commission so that everybody can look at it in all of Europe. So this is also fantastic. Now, indeed, with technology, a lot of biosimilars will be delivered through a device. Those devices, as was pointed out, are becoming increasingly digital, especially for chronic disease. And this is because there's a lot of monitoring of the patients with these chronic diseases. So that will improve over time. There are some issues that the Parliament and others are working on about how this information goes from one country to another, because one of the things we have discovered is that Europeans don't always stay in the same country. Sometimes they cross the border and they go across. And so these things have to work when you cross the border as well. But thankfully, the Parliament, the Commission are working on some of these, let's say, legal challenges that are there. But I think it's going to be much more digital. And certainly, the patients today are what we call empowered. What that means is they actually care about how they're being treated. They have certain demands. There has to be a discussion, and that's the way it's going to be in a democratic society like ours, and we're positive about that.
And alongside that, going forward, where do you think, with biosimilars in particular, there's now untapped potential? I mean, you've mentioned some of the conditions, you've mentioned cancer and other conditions that biosimilars can help with. Where is the untapped potential now going forward?
So there's a huge untapped potential. Okay, so over the next 5 years, biosimilars could target 100 new medicines. So this would bring competition, so price competition, and therefore improved access to 100 medicines in Europe. If successful, this will mean that biosimilars will be equivalent to generic medicines in terms of the sustainability, the access and savings that they can bring to healthcare systems. So it's absolutely huge. So if there's any country that doesn't focus on biosimilars, they're going to lose all of this opportunity for the healthcare system. So this is something absolutely huge. The challenge that we have is that for many of these medicines, they're targeting very narrow spectrum diseases, so very small patient population diseases, so extremely rare cancers or orphan diseases, for example. And we need to update, and the European Commission is updating its legislation on the pharmaceutical regulation to enable biosimilars to be developed for these very small, rare disease populations. This is super important because these are also the most expensive drugs, are typically in these very rare conditions, so they are the highest cost for the healthcare system. So if we don't bring biosimilar competition to them, we will run out of money in the healthcare system, literally. So we need to enable this, but also because probably in many countries in Europe, the poorer countries, there is no access to these therapies currently. So if we want to create that access, we're going to need biosimilars.
Thomas, we talked there about reviewing the legislation to open up biosimilars to these conditions that Adrian was talking about there. Why hasn't that happened sooner? Why is it only happening now, and how much longer is it going to take? And then sort of the second part of that question is, how important is all of this in terms of this word he used as sustainability? How important is it in terms of building sustainable health systems in Europe going forward? Because they're facing so many pressures, aging populations, they don't stop, right? So.
So there are several questions there on the first part. So it's very hard to change European legislation because the process is so complicated. So first you have to get the Commission to propose. We in the Parliament do not have the so-called right of legislative initiative, so we cannot propose new legislation. We have to wait for the Commission. After that, when the Commission proposes, then the Parliament and the Council, meaning the Member States, have to agree. And it's very hard to open such new legislation, revision of legislation, and because of this very complicated procedure, the Commission is reluctant to engage in this before conducting any sorts of impact assessments, very long collaborations with stakeholders. It takes years. So to start with this, after making all of these impact assessments and consultations, that takes years. Then the procedure itself takes years, and then the implementation also takes years.
Sure.
But and
in the meantime, all these patients are waiting.
That's the nature of the European Union decision-making process, because we want to combine efficacy on one side, but also protect national prerogatives on the other side, etc. So it is very complicated. We hope that it will change. We in the Parliament have already started with initiatives on how to strengthen the EU competences in the area of healthcare to make some things easier and simpler. But again, this cannot be decided by the Parliament, but only by the consensus of all the member states. We want to change this whole setup.
But the pressures are real. They're happening now on the health system. So something has to be done quite quickly if we're going to have sustainable health.
The subsidiarity principle, which is the basis of EU, says that that the EU should resolve problems which member states cannot resolve by themselves. And healthcare, these kinds of issues are precisely those issues. So we need more Europe in the area of healthcare, but what is essential to get political consensus on this. Once we get the political consensus, we always find the legal way somehow to do it. Political will is crucial. But to come back to sustainability, so we have to tell the public that healthcare costs will continue to rise. There is no magic stick to reduce it, because, as you said, elderly population is getting older and older, so the life expectancy is bigger and bigger, but this means bigger healthcare costs. That's
and COVID drained a lot of resources.
Also because the focus was there, a lot of diagnostics was delayed. We'll see the consequences in the years to come. We still don't have all the data. Also, we have all of these new technologies which cost a lot of money, and this is precisely why biosimilars, I think, are the future, because here if you can get the same result in terms of safety and efficiency with 30 or 40% less investment, plus the fact that maybe if the whole regulatory procedure if it is also simpler, it also means spending less money, for instance, for phase 3 clinical trials, then this is something which is definitely a big opportunity for the healthcare systems. And what is also important here, as was mentioned before, to see healthcare investment not as cost but as an investment. So this paradigm shift, to see what are the actual societal but also economic benefits of having healthier population. If you have longer possibility to work, to be physically active, to be productive, contribute to society, this also has an economic value. So this is, I think, also important. And one last point that I wanted to mention about the primary care and the GPs. In many member states, and the COVID-19 has shown us that we really neglected primary care in terms of investments, in terms of priorities, in terms of specializations, etc. And that has proven to be a big problem. So I think that member states should invest more into primary care. Many member states. Us from the EU should provide additional funding for that. We already have the cohesion policy, the recovery and resilience facility, etc. So we should definitely invest much more in the workforce in general than we invested before. Because also, one thing that is also important, so patient empowerment is great. I'm a health lawyer, I'm a professor of health law, so I support this. But this has also, one of the downsides of this has also been the emergence of these so-called defensive medicines. That the GPs, especially those who maybe do not have very strong additional education or who do not have specialization or something like that, or do not have a lot of experience, are reluctant to prescribe certain things because they are afraid of legal liability if something goes wrong. So this culture needs to be
sort of holds back.
And this so they're just shifting the costs on the secondary level, and then we have bottlenecks on the secondary and tertiary level, etc. So I think we have to invest more into primary care in general, into more specializations, into stronger education on part of that. Of course, the priorities are set by the member states, but we from the EU can provide financial support and actually provide incentives for the member states to actually invest more into primary care.
Okay, Tomislav. If you're just joining us, we've got a few minutes left. If you have any questions for any of our panellists, any of you in the audience that are watching us today, please do get in touch. Just leave them in the chat box next to the video, and we will get round to those if we have any during this debate. Luisa, I'd like to go back to you in Italy. We heard a lot there about it takes years for legislation to come into effect, and building this sort of sustainable healthcare systems of the future. Where are the patients in all of that? They're left waiting, I guess. So how do you think more sustainable healthcare can be created in Europe over the coming years amid all these pressures? And, where do you think biosimilars come into all of that?
Well, starting from biosimilars, I think that, as I was mentioning earlier, the important aspect is to make every interlocutor aware of the importance of working together, informing, joining forces and empowering all the different levels. We were talking about patients, we were talking about medical providers, but also policymakers. So we should try to raise the level of awareness around biosimilars. For sure, cost saving is important. For sure, if we are able to invest those savings in a way that impact not only the general community, the general audience, but also the patient's community, we can reach better objective. But I also think that it's important at this point to try to have an overall picture of the situation, at least in Europe. Patients can play a role, but it's not only because it's years and years that the patient community is trying to get a louder voice, but at this because at this moment is the European Commission, is EMA, is the entire legal framework of Europe that is asking patients to play a more active role. And the best way is working together. I don't think it's a question of deciding who is more on the right side or on the other side. The problem is trying to find the best way to give value to all the different voices. And in my experience, I saw that very often by joining forces, it's possible to achieve a very good result. It happened a few years ago when we have been working together with industries and policymakers around the issue. At that time was around the issue of biologics, and I have to say that the problem was the same. There was a low level of understanding about the importance and the impact of biologics medicines in taking care, in improving the quality of care and life of patients. And now I see more or less the same level of difficulties. We should be a bit more, we should find an easier way simply because we are in a different historical period. We know that saving money, particularly for the health system, is very, very important. We know, because now it's about 7 years, if I'm not wrong, that the discussion around safety and efficacy of biosimilars has been solved. So we have all the elements that could give us the possibility of stressing the importance of offering more impactful and effective drugs to patients. And also, and this is more, how can I say, suggestion to investors, maybe some of the savings could be used for developing drugs for rare disease or orphan, or those diseases that are, for the moment, not curable and would be great for that.
Okay, Louisa, thank you. Ian from Biogen, we're running out of time, but the question of this debate is how can Europe shape the future of biosimilar medicines? So how can it? What needs to happen now?
Well, first of all, I think they're doing a great job. And I think other regions are looking this way. I think it's about balance, both short-term and long-term. And we're seeing that. And, you know, the policies that will come, we're welcoming them, and we also want to be part of that, which I'll come to in a minute, which is around the partnership and the partnership on policy and direction. And I think there's good debate here, and these are the characters that need to talk. But ultimately it's about patients. And, you know, whether you're saving lives or transforming more lives, this is about the output. So as long as we can agree that that is the overall output, and we use the wealth of data and experience that we've got, I actually have a lot of hope for what we're about to do. So that's probably my, you know, first of all, being here, and also from, you know, coming into this debate around some of the parameters.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Adrian, what needs to happen now?
Yeah, so before I say that, I just want to mention that this week is Global Biosimilars Week.
Of course.
So if any of the audience wants to learn more about biosimilars, they just type that into the internet or LinkedIn or something like that, and you'll find all kinds of videos, information, documentation about biosimilars, so you can learn more.
Great.
But what the European Union can do, so I think here, really, with biosimilars, this is an incredible opportunity. When we think about healthcare systems, right, you've always got the finance minister looking at the healthcare system saying, hold on, don't spend too much money. Yeah. You know, we want to treat the patients, but, you know, we've got to also balance the budget. And here we have an opportunity with biosimilars to satisfy the finance minister, but more importantly, to treat more patients with the same amount or sometimes less money. And I think this is really what is missing. If we have a focused agenda on saying, look, these are the number of patients currently not treated. With the biosimilars, we can save them so much money and still treat more of them or provide some additional services they might need they can't afford right now. That is really an incredible win for the doctors, for the patients, for the healthcare system in terms of better health outcomes, and for the finance ministry. So this can really work for people. I think where the EU can help is, some of it is legislative. That takes some time. We need to go through the parliament, democracy, the whole thing. But some of the things, the European Medicines Agency, the European Commission, if they go to visit different countries, which they do from time to time, they can say, hey, why are the bowel disease patients not all treated when you have these affordable options? We're not dictating, we're just noting something is going on here. And if they could do this in more countries, especially in the CE countries, you would see a big difference.
Okay, Adrian, before I come to you, Tomislav, Louisa, 30 seconds, what do you want to see happen next in the EU in terms of shaping the future of biosimilar medicines?
I would like to see less inequality in accessing drugs, and I would like to see equal treatment in every European countries. It was said by the other panelists, there is still a lot of differences between countries, and I hope that with biosimilars, this big issue will be finally solved. So all patients in every European countries can have the same access and the same possibility of being treated.
Okay, Louisa. Tomislav, 30 seconds. What are you going to do about all of this? You've got a big weight on your shoulders now.
Biosimilars are the way of the future. They can really contribute to reducing inequalities and to treating more patients with the same or similar results. So this is something which is very important. What we can do on European level, so we can simplify procedures on the European level made by EMA. We can make it faster. We can reduce things which are necessary and adapt them to specific contexts of biosimilars. We also should engage with the member states, try to share best practices, provide them guidelines, and provide them with incentives to actually engage more and use biosimilars more. And what is also important is to keep momentum and to have all stakeholders working together to achieve this. So we need patient groups, we need healthcare professionals, but we also need pharma industry. We need to engage them as partners, not as enemies, even though some here in Brussels like this kind of a narrative. But I think we cannot do without them. We have to create partnership with them.
5 seconds.
And only with that we can create better health outcomes for our patients.
Perfect. Tomislav, Adrian, Ian, and Louisa as well in Italy. Thank you very much indeed for joining us for this very important debate today. Some really big takeaways there, aren't there, about the future of healthcare in the EU going forward. Thanks to all of you who have been watching today. And if you joined us part the way through this debate and you want to catch up on the full debate, you can find it on our website, euronews.com, from a bit later on this evening. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you again soon on another Euronews Debate.